Well, in session 4, we're looking at what would God say to Alan Greenspan, the chairman or the previous chairman to the Federal Reserve. I think before looking at that, we need to understand that money has the power to deceive us. It has the power of illusion. In fact, it was great growing up as an illusionist. I would do tricks all the time. And the great thing about a magician is you'll tell people to look at a card in this hand, you'll show them something over here, it'll come back and the card will be gone. You'll come back over here, it'll be back again. The power of illusion. Money has the ability to deceive the human heart in a way that nothing else does. In fact, I had my kids together a few years ago. I sold a boat, and I had $3,000 cash for this used boat I had. So I brought the $3,000, and I put it on the coffee table. And the kids had never seen that much money before in one place. And their eyes are this big. They couldn't believe all this money. And I said, now, money is important, but money can actually take our hearts away from God. We had a little conversation about that. I said, in fact, I'm so concerned that money might one day take your heart away from God, we're going to burn up this $3,000. So I took the $3,000 and I stuck it in a brown bag. And the kids were like, what are you doing, Dad? We got the point. No. We need to understand if anything is getting between our heart and God, we got to destroy it. Okay, Dad, we got it. No, come on. We went outside. We got a little burn barrel. I took the bag and I set it right there on the top. And we got out the matches and put some kerosene on it. And Javen and Sierra was like, Dad, we got it. You don't have to do this. No, we have to do this. We need to make sure money hasn't deceived us. So we took a match out and we burned it and began to burn. And they're watching me like, Dad, okay, now could we at least save some of the money? And it burned all the way up. And they're like, what did you do? Dad, what have you done? What they didn't know is the great thing about being a magician is I swapped bags. So as I was on my way out there, I took the bag with the real money and stuffed it in the corner, and I had a bag with Monopoly money that we actually burned. But they still talk about that incident because they realize that anything that keeps our heart, deceives our heart from God, we need to radically reshift our hearts and our lives toward God being our priority. Now I talk about illusions because what's so important in this session is we're going to look at 3 illusions. And inflation specifically, Godonomics in our first session, we looked at is about producing. Producing leads to profiting, profiting to savings, saving allows me to give, invest, and spend. Consumeronomics, or Keynesian economics, is built on consuming, borrowing, and the way a government specifically borrows is it borrows by taxing the producers, it borrows by inflation, this is what we're going to look at, and it enslaves itself by borrowing from other nations. Now what do I mean by that? Well, God wants us to experience liberty. Liberty, prosperity, and generosity. But in order to do that, we need to investigate 3 illusions, 3 ways in which money can have this shell game going on that can fool people. And the first one is the illusion of value. The illusion of value. Back during biblical times, the writer of Micah saw a way in which those who were powerful were exploiting and cheating the poor using dishonest scales. He says in Micah 6:11, shall I acquit a man with dishonest scales, with a bag of false weights? Now, what does he mean by that? Well, back in those days, you wouldn't carry around dollars. You'd carry around your silver or your gold. And when it came time to buy a particular sheep, you had a standardized weight. And the standardized weight would be on one side of the scale. And you would take your money, you would set it on the scale, and you would basically see whether or not your gold weighed as much as the standardized weight. And then you would get the sheep or whatever it was you were buying for that amount. Well, here's how they would cheat the system back then. The way to have an unequal scale was they would add a little extra weight to the standardized pound or whatever the standard they were using. So when you showed up with your bag of gold, you would put your gold on the scale, but it wouldn't balance out because this weighed more. It would take more of your gold and silver to weigh down the standard. Now, it's not like the sheep suddenly cost more or was of more value. But by cheating the system and the scale, what the merchant could do is he could get more of your money by making the weight weigh more. You say, well, we don't even use that kind of thing today. How does that apply today? Well, that's why we're looking at what would God say to Alan Greenspan. Woodrow Wilson, one of our presidents, set up the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve has an insidious way of stealing our money without us even realizing the scales have been messed with. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, what would God say to Woodrow Wilson? It's the same thing he'd probably say to Alan Greenspan and Ben Bernanke, who currently chairs the Federal Reserve. What are you doing? You are using dishonest scales. For instance, what happens is that a dollar used to be tied to a commodity. a commodity like gold or oil. It was gold in the United States. And this did a couple things. One, because our paper money was tied to a commodity, we couldn't keep printing a bunch more unless we got the same amount of gold somewhere in our reserves. Well, what this did is it forced politicians to budget, because you couldn't just print money out of thin air without having a corresponding amount of gold. Well, Woodrow Wilson came along and said, I'd like to have a lot more money, print a bunch more money, but I'm tied to this gold standard that I don't like. We need to get rid of this thing. But don't worry, he said to the world, our dollar is so valuable, we promise, even though it's not tied to a commodity anymore, you can trust us. We won't print too much. We won't devalue the currency. But that's exactly what they did. We are now